We begin our report with President Biden and the threats that define his tenure. In February 2021, 1 month into his presidency, Biden said the world was at an inflection point between democracy and the rise of autocracy. 3.5 years later, that sentiment remains a cornerstone of his global posture. On Wednesday, President Biden kicked off day 2 of the NATO 75th anniversary summit in Washington. The military alliance is telling Russia and any other autocrats like China who might be watching that the war in Ukraine cannot continue. But amid lingering doubts about his fitness to carry out another 4 years in office, the commander-in-chief is also using NATO as a selling point for a second term.
Since I took office, we've doubled the number of battle groups in NATO's eastern flank, and the United States has. Finland and Sweden have joined the alliance, and the number of allies spending at least 2% on defense has gone from 9 to 23. That's not happened by chance, but by choice.
President Biden will host NATO leaders for a reception at the White House Wednesday evening. On Thursday, senior campaign advisors will head to Capitol Hill to meet with Senate Democrats about the path forward for Biden's candidacy against NATO critic Donald Trump. But the politics of the moment mean little to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has fought against Russian forces for nearly 2.5 years. He said Tuesday the fate of his country cannot hinge on one election.
Now everyone is waiting for November. And truly speaking, Putin awaits November 2. It's time to step out of the shadows, to make strong decisions work, to act and not to wait for November or any other month.
Let's bring in Max Bergmann. He's the director of the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Max, thanks for being with us. It's good to have you again. Help us understand what questions NATO, what are the questions in front of NATO that are up for grabs, and how much sway does President Biden have in determining the course or the answers to those questions?
Well, I think a lot of the questions, John, have been addressed, have been discussed for a while, going back since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And this summit, in some ways, is a fairly technocratic summit. NATO laid out a new strategy 2 years ago. Last year, they determined these sort of regional plans, how they would defend against a Russian attack. And this year is sort of checking to make sure that folks are implementing these plans. And it seems that NATO is really on the right course. When it comes to Ukraine, the key is continued military support for Ukraine. We have to remember that Ukraine is still surviving. It exists. I think there was a few months ago, there was real concern about where Ukraine would be at the time of the summit, whether it was going to be on the back foot with Russia really making real gains on the ground. But U.S. aid is flowing. Ukraine is holding the lines, and Ukrainian democracy is surviving, is in strong shape. So in many ways, there's a lot going right with the alliance, and this was in some ways a summit to reflect on what was going right with the NATO alliance.
In a joint statement of NATO leaders, they said Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, but didn't say how soon that would happen. How strong of a statement is that? Is that something that has to be said because Ukraine's in the middle of a fight with Russia? Help us understand that comment.
Yeah, so there was a lot of discussion, especially at the last year's summit, about whether Ukraine would get an invitation to join NATO. The Biden administration and as well as other NATO countries decided now is not the right time for an invitation. Ukraine is obviously at war with Russia, and so bringing Ukraine in might mean war with Russia. And the Biden administration has made very clear that it is not going to send U.S. forces to defend Ukraine. And so what you then have is a lot of diplomatic efforts to really show strong words and commitment to Ukraine in this communique that is really poured over by nerds like me. But in reality, I think that the key thing that really matters is the other announcements about air defense support, about continuing military support for Ukraine in providing assistance. And so irreversible, I think, shows that Ukraine is on track to join the West, to join the European Union and NATO. And I think it's an important signal, not just to Moscow, but I think to the rest of the world as well.
Max, President Zelensky mentioned November. Let me just stop the question there. How much does that hang over this meeting, and what are the ramifications about how the U.S. elections turn out?
Well, it hangs over. It really does hang over the meeting. The Europeans are obsessed with American politics because their security in some ways depends on the election. There's been a lot of focus on the president's performance at the debate roughly 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago. But NATO came up continuously throughout the debate in ways that wouldn't be reassuring to Europeans, particularly when it comes to Donald Trump's skepticism. And the reason why Europe is so concerned is that this is not just about spending money. Europe could spend a lot more money and would still be fully dependent on the United States because that's the way the United States has wanted Europe to be. The U.S. has wanted to call the shots in NATO, and we do. And that gives us incredible influence, gives us this really strong allies, but it also means that the U.S. pulls back. Europe can't simply fill the gap. The U.S. is the quarterback of this team, and it's a real problem if you don't have a quarterback.
And super quick, Max, the NATO leaders also called China a quote-unquote decisive enabler of Russia. Is that just rhetoric, or is there something particular we should pay attention to there?
No, I think that's quite significant, John, because, look, Washington can say whatever it wants about China, and it won't change any behavior in Beijing. But China is really also dependent on the European market. It wants to have good relations with Europe. And from the Washington perspective, getting Europe to call out China and China's support for Russia has been really important. And we think that might change Chinese behavior, maybe not significantly, but maybe at the margins. And I think it's a strong statement to China that its support for the Russian defense industry is endangering European security, and Europeans are going to take note and take names. And I think that's an important signal to send.
Max Bergmann with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Very helpful, Max. Thank you.
Thanks.